A middle school teacher worries that one of his students has been skipping lunch, but then he finds out the truth. Mr. Hansen sat back down at his desk after handing out quiz papers. He glanced across his class, the heads were down as pencils scratched across paper. He watched for anyone who needed help. He knew a few students that might have trouble, and after a few minutes, one raised their hand for help. Mr. Hansen rose to do exactly that. As he moved from student to student, Mr. Hansen paid attention. Sure, he was checking for cheaters, but he was also looking out for students who looked particularly tired or stressed. If it was just someone looking tired once or twice, then he could chalk it up to a bad day or a bad night's sleep and just make sure they weren't struggling in class. But if he noticed a pattern of repeated issues, then he could try to do something to help. Usually that just meant checking in with them, seeing what they're struggling with, and helping where he could, or even offering a snack if it seemed like they just missed lunch. At the end of class, as students handed in their papers and headed out for the day, Mr. Hansen wished them all a good day and handed a few kids a small candy. Some seemed to be having a bad day or seemed to be running on too little sleep or missed lunch. They took the treats without much more than a small grateful smile. Mr. Hansen had explained the reason behind them at the beginning of the year after all, which is when he'd also gotten the necessary information on allergies. In particular, Mr. Hansen made sure to hand a candy to a kid named Steven. He noticed that the kid seemed more tired over the past few days. He did have Mr. Hansen's class at the end of the day, and most kids were tired by that point, but Steven was an exception usually. He was an energetic kid, always excited to learn, but over the past few days he'd barely spoken and seemed afraid. During the quiz, Mr. Hansen had heard Steven's stomach growling. As he handed over the candy, Mr. Hansen worried that Steven hadn't been eating for some reason, and that was why he was so tired. The next day, Mr. Hansen set up a small basket of snacks on the classroom's back table. At the beginning of that day's classes, he explained that the students could help themselves if they felt like they needed a small snack or simply wanted a treat. He kept it stocked and noted that Steven did take a bag of chips on his way out the door. The kid still looked hungry, but it was a start. He sighed and got to work on some grading as the noises of students filled the hallways, then quieted as the hallways emptied. Once he had some grading done, he was still worried, so he decided to check some stuff himself and called up Steven's mom. "Hello?" She answered the phone. "Hi, Ms. Miller, this is Mr. Hansen. I'm one of Steven's teachers. How are you doing today?" "I'm doing well. I hope you're doing well too, Mr. Hansen. Is everything okay with Steven?" Yes, he's doing very well in my class," Mr. Hansen reassured. "In fact, if you haven't already heard, we had a quiz the other day and he got a 90%. "He hadn't mentioned that actually. I'm glad to hear it." Ms. Miller's smile was audible in her voice. "So what can I help you with today, Mr. Hansen?" "Well, I've noticed Steven seeming a little tired lately, and I just wanted to check whether he's been eating and sleeping okay at home." "He seems to be eating well enough at breakfast and dinner." A questioning note entered Ms. Miller's voice. "Though he does seem to snack more when he gets home now that I think about it." "Does Steven typically get lunch here at school, or does he bring a home lunch?" "I send him to school with a lunchbox every day, and he always brings it back empty." "All right, is he there now? I'd like to talk to him if I can." "No, he's at a sleepover with a friend." "Okay, I think that I'll check in with him at lunch tomorrow to make sure. I've been providing some snacks for everyone if they need them, but as I'm sure you understand, I'd like to make sure everything's okay." "Of course, and please keep me updated. I'll try to pay more attention on this end." "I will. Thank you for speaking with me. I'll call you again if I find anything, all right?" "Thank you for your concern, Mr. Hansen. I'll talk to you later then." The next day, Mr. Hansen headed for the cafeteria before he settled down for his own lunch. He usually ate in the teacher's lounge or in his own classroom when he had to get work done, but this time he stepped into the cafeteria first to do a quick scan of the room. After a minute or so, he spotted Steven sitting at a table with another kid that Mr. Hansen didn't recognize. He watched as Steven put his lunchbox on the table, and after pulling out everything out of the bag, he immediately divided the contents in half and slid one half towards the other kid. The other kid grinned hugely, and the two seemed to fall into easy, happy conversation as they ate. The other kid didn't have a tray or lunchbox with him. Mr. Hansen returned to his classroom to eat his own meal. He waited until the end of class to ask Steven to stay for a minute. Once everyone else had left, Steven glanced at Mr. Hansen nervously. "Is everything okay, Mr. Hansen?" "Of course, I just wanted to know about your friend at lunch. Have you been sharing your food with him for a while?" "Yeah." "Is it okay if I ask you why you've been sharing your lunch with him?" Mr. Hansen tried to keep his voice calm and reassuring. Steven paused. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "'Cause Jimmy doesn't have any." "He doesn't have any what, Steven?" "He doesn't have any lunch. He never has any lunch." "I see." It was Mr. Hansen's turn to pause, then he stood, Steven looking down. "Am I in trouble?" he asked. "No, of course not, Steven." Mr. Hansen picked up the snack basket to take home for the day and offered it to Steven first. "Here, take one." He let Steven choose his snack, then tucked the basket under one arm. "I'm gonna call your mom, okay? But I want to make it clear you're not in trouble. We were just both worried about you that you haven't been eating enough." "But what about Jimmy?" Mr. Hansen smiled and ruffled the kid's hair. Steven was just worried about his friend. It was honestly incredibly admirable of him. "Don't worry, Steven. We'll make sure that Jimmy gets enough to eat too."